Actively managing your personal brand is critical if you want to make a significant impact in the areas of your life important to you. I'm Garry Browne, the Personal Brand Catalyst. I've spent most of my life working in the world of branding products. More recently, I've been exploring the world of personal branding and wrote a book on this, Brand New, Brand You. And the podcast has come out of this as a way to share first-hand experiences from some of Australia's most recognised personal brands. Peter Baines served with the New South Wales Police for 22 years and led teams responding to acts of terrorism and natural disaster on a scale not previously experienced by Australian police. Becoming a specialist in forensic crime scene investigations, he was called upon to bring his skills to the Bali bombings in 2002. But it was the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami that forever changed the direction of his life. Helping the people of Thailand identify their dead, he met the countless children who had been left behind, with nowhere to go. In late 2005, he founded Hands Across the Water to raise funds for the awareness about the orphaned children of Thailand. In his final years with the New South Wales Police, Peter spent time on secondment to the National Institute of Forensic Science, building projects around counter-terrorism and leadership. He spent time advising Interpol in France and the United Nations Office on drugs and crime in Southeast Asia. He also had the opportunity of working in Saudi Arabia and Japan following disasters that have fallen upon those countries. Since 2006, Peter has been routinely travelling the globe sharing stories and learning lessons along the way. Peter has been fortunate to speak as a keynote speaker in the US, across Europe and Asia. Speaking allows Peter to mix something that is a deep privilege, which is to stand on a stage and share stories, with the charity work that now occupies so much of his time. Hands has raised over 30 million Australian dollars to date. They have built several children's homes across Thailand, purchased a rubber plantation to create a sustainable regular income, constructed a community centre in the Karlak region of Thailand, and a digital learning centre in the northeast. The charity now has operations in 7 different locations in Thailand and provides home for several hundred children every night. But its focus is on the long-term future of the children and the communities which they live. They have also supported more than 30 children through university, all of whom have graduated and look forward to a life of choice rather than chance. Peter has received numerous awards, including the Order of Australia Medal in 2014 for his international humanitarian work. He was awarded the Most Admirable Order of the Dega Gun Abon 5th Class by the King of Thailand in 2016. He was the New South Wales finalist for the Australia of the Year in 2010, the first Australian to be awarded the International Honour of the Rotary Professional Excellence Award in 2008, and medals from the New South Wales Police Service and the Australian Federal Police Operations work in Asia. Peter and his wife Claire have 3 adult children and 1 grandchild. They divide their time between their farm in Cabtree Valley and Terrigal. Peter has written 3 books, Hands Across the Water, Doing Good by Doing Good, and his latest, Leadership Matters. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time today to sit and have a chat.
Oh, my pleasure, Garry. Always look forward to catching up with you.
It is a real privilege, and to have you on the podcast of the Personal Brand Catalyst is very unique in so many ways. But I think, to me, I've always known you as Peter Baines. But I think your name and who you are is much bigger than that. And I just wondered how you actually see yourself. Do you see yourself as you, Peter Baines, or do you see yourself as Peter Baines, the brand?
No, and it's a really interesting point. And I've got a friend by the name of Paul Watkins. And now Paul he's a pharmacist, he's an ultra athlete, he's a property developer, he drives forklifts, he's a stay-at-home dad. And it's a really interesting thing that Paul says it depends who he's talking to as how he introduces himself and how he sees himself. And he said what's more interesting is then how people view him depending upon how he's introduced himself. If he says, I've run the Arctic Circle, people are fascinated. If he says, I'm a stay-at-home dad, not so much. And I think it's, the same for me, Garry, that there's, like all of us, there's lots of different levels and layers, and and I think it becomes as to who I'm talking to and what I'm doing at that immediate time as to where I see myself. It could be as a farmer, where I'm driving my tractor around, slashing my paddocks. It could be as a helicopter pilot, although I don't get paid for it. That's just a casual pursuit. And it could be a speaker, a charity founder. So I think it's this whole mix that makes us up.
Totally get that. So are you thinking of yourself as a brand or as you?
No, I think of myself as me, but I also acknowledge the point you make that at times it needs to be about the brand. And when it needs to be about the brand is when I'm putting the hat on for Hands Across the Water and I'm looking at how I best represent that organisation and what I can do to deliver results to that. And that's attached to the brand per se of Peter Baines.
And I understand that. But how do you think others perceive you?
Well, I guess it's how, where they know me from. And if it's a close connection, I think it's just as to who I am. And I think what I might have done previously is less important than when we move into a professional context. It might be as a speaker and as a founder of a charity. It might be as a humanitarian. I guess it's an interesting thing. I haven't spent a lot of time reflecting on how others view me as well. If
we take that perspective and mix it up a bit and look at you as a founder of a charity, Hands Across the Water, it's coming up for its 20-year anniversary.
Correct. Yeah.
You, to some extent, have stapled your brand and identity to that particular charity.
Yeah, correct.
If you decide to step away at some stage from the charity, is that a difficult decision to make for you, in the sense of, is there so much of that charity and your identity tied up that it makes it a very sticky decision, to put it nicely?
It's a conversation that I've been having with my wife and with our board and internally for some time about stepping away. And I think what comes up most for me around the stepping away is, and whether this is ego or not, but not wanting to see the charity, then the children that we support, be negatively affected by my absence. And I don't think it's because I've got any immense power or intelligence or, position that creates this potential void. It's the opportunity I have to distribute the message and of Hands and the charity and what we're doing. So the question and the deliberation that I have around stepping away is there's a lot attached to Hands. I started it, and it's something that I guess if you started a business, that there's a lot of emotion.
Absolutely, and it's your baby.
It is, yeah.
But as we know, children grow up and have to
leave home.
Fly. Maybe put it into another context, because it is emotion. But you spent a lot of time in the police force.
Correct.
Was that a difficult decision to leave?
No, and it was probably more on a timing aspect. It was something that I've never regret leaving, but I certainly miss it. And I think the reason I left was I'd spent 22 years or so forth, and the majority of that in the forensic area. Worked in Bali after the bombings and worked in Thailand after the tsunami. After 2005, I was then invited to a international secondment where I worked on counter-terrorism with Interpol in Lyon in France, and then worked for the UN Office of Drug and Crime. And there were two, I guess, parallels in my life at the time. Garry, one is I'd started the charity in 2005. This was now 2008. There was certainly momentum, reliance and dependence upon the charity. And at the end of that 2.5 years, because the secondment into the counter-terrorism area was only supposed to be for 12 months, and it was extended a couple of times. And when I returned to New South Wales Police, because they said, you've got to come back, we haven't seen you. We've been paying you, but we haven't seen you for 2.5 years. And And I went back and I asked for 12 months leave without pay so I could focus on the charity because I knew, Garry, if I returned to my role, whatever role it was within New South Wales Police, I wouldn't have the freedom nor the capacity to do what I was doing to continue to build and grow the charity. And so the question about leaving was, do I leave the police 22 years on? And I'd invested a lot in that. I did science at university. I did law at university. I got promoted very young. I'd had international exposure. And I think it's fair to say there was a good career ahead of me. But the price was, if I went down that path, the charity, I think, would have, very quickly ground to a halt. And so the decision to leave was easy because of the consequence of taking one or the other, but it wasn't insignificant.
Understand. In fact, what you're saying is that charity had more of the purpose, passion and values that dragged you, if I can use that word drag, but caused you to move towards charity rather than the employment you had. Because you
I don't even know if it was that. I think it was more that it was a very clear matter that if I stayed, I couldn't support the children. So it wasn't as though the values or the purpose outweighed.
No, they were different.
They were different, and the implication, I think if I can put it this way, returning to the police or leaving the police would have an insignificant impact upon anyone else except me. Leaving the charity would have a huge impact upon those left behind.
Absolutely. And that's you being selfless or being selfish rather than selfless.
Perhaps.
Which is your nature, which is why you start the charity.
Correct, yes.
Which is part of your brand.
Correct, yes.
And which is part of the charity's brand.
Yes.
And that makes it even more challenging to bring those two components or separating those two components.
Correct.
That leads us to a discussion in terms of reputation. That's obviously something where everyone guards it. A lot of people guard it jealously, others don't. When did it become important in your career? Being in the police is obviously a different environment to a professional business or other type of environment. But when did reputation become important to you?
I think as I started to move through the specialist area within the police, was that reputation amounted for a lot. And it's on different layers, like giving evidence before a Supreme Court in a homicide trial or a coronial investigation when you're giving opinion evidence based upon your interpretation, and you have to be an expert to be considered by the court as an expert to give opinion evidence. So from those very early days, your reputation was important. And I think it was something that, although I might not have framed it and have been as conscious of it, certainly as the way you portray it, but I think from those very early days, it was very important to have be respected for the work that you did and the professionalism that you brought to the role. And so right from back then.
So how important is it to have reputable individuals, people, stakeholders around you? Is this something that forms part of your selection process when you're looking at various parties or partners to get involved in?
I think with the charity, as you know, being a huge supporter of the work that we've done and continue to do, is that when you attach yourself to a cause that involves children and children without parents living in group homes, negative actions or reputations can end the charity. And I think it's who we attach ourselves to and their actions has a heightened sense, because we're dealing with other people's money and we're dealing with vulnerable children. And I think transgressions in the use of other people's money or how the children are cared for can absolutely be the undoing and the demise and downfall of the charity and the work that we do. So it's very important.
I guess in the environment in which you operate, these components, and we'll come on to the issue of values in a minute, but when you're dealing in different countries, different jurisdictions, different cultures, the perspective of values, reputation, etc., can be quite different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that becomes an issue.
Absolutely. And it's then you're balancing the values and perspective of different cultures. And it can't be that when we're in Thailand that we're only bound by those, because the Thais will be more relaxed around one thing, but you're an Australian you've got the values here, and they'll be stricter around there. So it's a dance that you, I think, continue to have working across cultures and different countries.
So when did you establish or understand where your values started, where they came from? Is that something you've spent time thinking about?
Probably not a lot of conscious time thinking about personal values, and I think that they're hugely influenced by the work ethic of my parents growing up, and then I think it's something that you absorb from those who are in your life, both good and bad, and hopefully you make decisions that lead you towards the good rather than the bad.
Sure.
Although we all transgress, don't we, at different times.
So aligned with your values, your beliefs. When did your beliefs start to take some form of substance in your life?
When I think about where I am, and it's an interesting question, Garry, because it's something that I was only thinking about recently and wanting from this point forward to make better decisions and be a better person and so forth. And so I'd like to think it's certainly an evolving process, and where there's a reassessment over the past and some reflection on what you've done and potentially what you could have done differently and indeed better. But I think certainly the time since I stepped away from the police was when you're on your own and working for yourself, leading the direction of the charity, asking people to believe in you and your cause and what you're about has been probably the biggest change.
I mean, our beliefs, I think, change over time, and probably our values don't. They might adjust accordingly, but I think it can be very difficult when you are in two different countries or working in two different countries, and your beliefs here in some ways related to the environment.
Correct, yeah.
Go into another country and they've got different value systems. It's really hard, I would imagine, at times to reconcile them.
It is, and certainly working through Thailand through the tsunami, where we had 36 different countries represented, and all who came together in response to that, the humanitarian response to the attempt to identify the bodies. And as one of the international leaders of that response, we're working with the different countries and different teams deployed, and it was very much highlighted the different values and beliefs that existed within the teams from different countries, different cultures. I think it's the ability to work across those different countries, and it comes with maturity, doesn't it? It comes with an awareness and an increased level of acceptance that ours isn't the right way or the only way.
Absolutely right. So have you ever had your values tested?
Yeah, I think that, in different times, what you stand for is tested. And I think that through the work that we've done, certainly in Thailand, and, working with someone who purported to be doing something for the benefit of children in the far north, and that we were introduced to, and they were well outside of challenging beliefs and values. They were operating criminally, and it was a big decision, not a difficult decision, but it was a big process to unravel all of that, and Hands had its name attached to it. And, we had transparency and good on our side, but it was certainly a challenging time.
What about in your previous life, if you can talk about it, of any position you were placed in policing where your values were tested?
I think the work through what I did in the forensic area, I never felt as though my values were compromised or challenged. And probably the example that I think about and was a significant turning point, both in my career and life, was the investigation. I was working as a coroner's assistant for matters reported to the coroner, and when I was studying law, and I was still working in the forensic area, and my boss had investigated the scene of a fatal house fire and identified the cause and origin of that fire as an accidental fire. And as I was reviewing the brief of evidence to present to the coroner, it became clear to me that it was a mistake. His opinions were flawed. And the words were from one of the inspectors who travelled up from Sydney, was only one of you will survive. And it was staking a lot because he was 2 levels senior to me, and I report to him, and now I'm challenging his work. And, at the end of the day, there were things done where he attempted to cover up or to change the error of his ways. And I was dragged to Sydney and told that I'd never be promoted, my career would never go any further. They were bringing in an independent forensic investigator to look at it from the Northern Territory, and lo and behold, that person found that everything I'd said was right. It was a case of seeing something wrong and standing for what was right against the tide that was pressing. And the funny part to the story, Garry, is the person who told me I'd never be promoted and only one of us would survive. Yeah. He ended up ringing me some 2 years later and advising me that he'd promoted me on from an interview panel. So it was there you go. What
goes around comes around.
And absolutely.
Comes of good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing good, I think, is one of your titles, isn't it?
That's right. My second book. Correct. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I'm sure that you've got plenty more stories in that regard. It must be such a challenging job and role to be in the police and try and align all the time. It can't happen. I mean, humanity is such that we all have to make choices. And some people make a decision can affect their livelihood and income.
And I think that, speaking more generally about the police, I think one of the most difficult things, and it's not just for the police, but when you're asked to make significant decisions in the field where you might have limited resources, limited time, under pressures and so forth, and then when those decisions are then poured over in reviews by people without the pressures, I think is always a difficult process to go through.
We talked earlier, and I'm going back to the branding, the personal branding issue. You sort of said, yes, on one hand you could be a brand, and on the other, depending on the audience you're talking to. Do you think you could articulate a point in time when you realised that possibly you were a brand in whatever audience or forum you're?
Oh, absolutely. Every time I'm engaged to speak at a conference as a keynote speaker, we were talking before the podcast about our love or hate of going to networking events. And as an example, when I do an offshore conference, often you'll fly in the day before. Inevitably, there'll be a dinner the night that I've arrived, and I'll be speaking the next day. And normally it's a 2-night event, and you'll be invited to the dinner and drinks on the night when you've just arrived. And I politely and respectfully decline, because the idea or the thought of turning up to a group of people who all know each other, they know nothing about you. My brand is not such that I walk into the room and I'm recognisable and the story leads. So I always decline. But then, and it's because of just this uncomfortable nature I have in those situations. But then I have to then perform, for want of a better word, as soon as I step on stage. Yeah. And it's what people see is different than who I am. Not in what I speak about, not in my beliefs, but the comfort level, because I know I'm representing something that sits a little uncomfortable with me outside of that.
When you say what sits uncomfortable outside, can you be
sure. So when I walk onto a stage and there could be anything from 100 to 1,000 people,
Yep.
and you're there, everyone's looking at you, and you deliver a presentation
Yep.
which is full of emotion. It'll make people laugh, it'll make people cry. I'll hold their attention for an hour or whatever the duration is, and walk off stage, and the adulation and the comments and standing ovations are wonderful. But I can be in a social setting and people will look at me and think, what's wrong with him? Why is he not speaking? And it's because it's one on stage. I have to be something which I'm not entirely comfortable with or resonates with me outside of that. To the very point where, as I was saying before we started this, I was supposed to go to somewhere tonight. The idea of walking into a room, knowing no one, trying to make conversation with people is so uncomfortable for me.
But you don't have to do that.
I don't have to do that. But when I'm on stage, I have to be something, which is the brand of Peter Baines, keynote speaker.
So how, in the non-speaking environment, do you see yourself a brand?
Only to the point of needing to, and it's not as though that I struggle with this, but knowing that the actions and how I live my life is something that, as the founder and director of the charity, I'm conscious of, is attached to that. So whatever I do personally, I don't think there's a clear separation between, well, that's in your personal life and you're the charity founder. I see people see it all as one. And so, there's a bit of a saying, would you do it if you thought you were going to be on the front page of the Herald? And if you're not happy with what you're doing being reported on the Herald, well, there's your values.
That's very true.
If you're struggling with it, and it's not a challenge I have in keeping off the front page of the Herald, but it's something that where that question around, are you a brand, away from that, and less so, but still connected to the brand.
I think I know you reasonably well, and I don't see a difference between...
That's interesting.
Yeah. But I think I know you in different circles that allows me to understand who you, the person, are, which gets me on to the area of relevance in terms of your different circles in life. Is that something you think about, your relevance to your family, to your friends, etc.?
Do I think about whether I'm relevant? Yeah.
Do you think you'd lose your relevance in any of your circles, or that you think you're losing it and you need to do something different? Is that something you've given thought to?
I certainly think when we talk about the charity, there's a change in relevance, and I'm very conscious of the relevance the charity plays, but I see that as a different question. Personally, there's absolutely a relevance around the topic that I speak on when people attach it to an event which is coming up to 20 years. I'm not concerned around any of that other than the charity side, but from a personal relevance, I'm completely comfortable where things are at.
One of the things that really drove me on writing this book was the fact that I was concerned about losing my relevance to my children.
Right.
And I'd read a lot about how generational the gap of teenagers to adults separated by a multiple of 4. So if they were 13 years of age, 4 times that's 52, there's 4 different teenage periods that have gone through before. So every year it would change.
Yeah, sure.
And what were the things that I needed to do to keep my relevant to my children? And I think that there is this gap when grandparents talk about the fact, the children don't want me. They don't make contact with me. It's a relevance issue. What do you do to engage them? Because it takes 2 to tango.
Correct.
And so I think a lot of families, people generally have that problem because friends come and go because of relevance. So that's why I asked you on that basis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I can see the question there,
but it's not relevant to you because you are relevant. Which is so important because you obviously have a natural ability and talent to make sure you connect.
And I don't know that it's not driven by anything like that. One of the things I'm really fortunate in is the opportunities that are afforded to me in life, that what I get to do with hands, with travel. I was running yesterday afternoon. I ran past someone, a man probably similar age to myself, and it was very clear he had a a severe medical condition that affected his legs, where there was a problem, and he was walking very slowly, and it's not something that was temporary, it was a long-term problem. And as I ran past him, I just felt so much gratitude for my health, and that at the age of 56, that I can sign on to do some big adventures. I can lead an 800-kilometre bike ride, then the following week I can be snowboarding with my kids in Japan. I think the relevance comes from having an active and full life, more so than any conscious choice to change or be closer.
That's great to hear. That's terrific. You are certainly gifted in that regard, and the fact you can see that's so important.
Yeah, and I think too, Garry, seeing a lot of my former colleagues who left the police with PTSD from that forensic area, and the exit out of the police. And before I left, I resigned, and I was in a senior position within the forensic services group that was responsible for communicating with those that went off with PTSD. And the exit out of the police with PTSD was one that would normally take a couple of years for you to be formally exited. And it started with you going off sick one day, producing a doctor's certificate for a couple of weeks, and they never came back. And for the next couple of years to prosecute the case that they had PTSD and receive settlements and payouts, their life consisted of doctors and lawyers being told how sick they were. And I see people who of my age that I worked with, and whether I need to look in the mirror a bit more, Garry, but these blokes look like they're old. They look like they're old men, and some of the things I'm doing personally and creating work opportunities and so forth, that I feel like it's retirement is so many years away, but because I see the impact on the health of the guys who took this exit 10 years ago, who have been retired in inverted commas and doing bugger all for 10 years, and how it's aged them.
Sure.
And question of relevance, well...
Absolutely. They've lost their purpose and their identity. That's a very sad situation. So tell me, in your career, your different careers, is there any people that mentored you or helped you on the way?
There's a man by the name of Peter Walsh, and he stands out to me for a very clear reason, and is always first to mind when someone asks a question similar to what you just did. And I'll set this up for you. When I worked in Tamworth within the Forensic Services Group, I was a detective sergeant there in charge of the unit, and we were a tenant in the Tamworth Police Station. So we could have been in the local council building for all the matter it made, because our group was attached to the Major Crime Squad in Parramatta. But we were located in the Tamworth Police Station. So the superintendent of Tamworth Police Station, who was probably 50 metres down the hall, had no accountability, no responsibility for us whatsoever. We were just a tenant in his building. And I was at Tamworth for 10 years. This superintendent was there in the latter part of my career there for several years. And Garry, I don't know that he ever stepped inside our office. Yet Peter Walsh, who was an assistant commissioner based out of Newcastle, was responsible for the northwest area, and he looked after Tamworth Police Station. So this superintendent at Tamworth reported to Peter. Peter had no say over us or anything. Whenever he visited Tamworth Police Station, he would come into our office and he would say, "G'day, Bainesy, how's the kids? How's your wife? How's life? How's everything going on?" And you know what, Garry? That meant the world to me. Yeah. And I've never forgot the importance of presence as a leader. And it's something I talk about in various examples. And whenever someone asks me about the impact of someone on my career, I think of Peter Walsh. I think about the example he set as what good leaders are about. He's a wonderful man, and I always felt valued being in his company.
And did you have regular contact with him apart from when he'd come to the office? Did you?
Not really, no. He was just when he was touring the area, and we might bump into each other through this 17,000 people in the police though. But whenever he came, he would, for no reason other than just to come in and say hello to people who were doing a job similar to him. And I always admired it.
Anyone else you've leaned on or secured advice and direction from that you would class as a mentor apart from him?
In the last, with Hans, that's been a journey of learning. Like, I started the charity at what was probably the darkest and most difficult time of my life.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about charity. I knew nothing about raising money. And I was still working in the police. And there's been a lot of growth through there, and I'm fortunate that I continue to grow. As you've done, written a wonderful book. I released my third book called Leadership Matters this year, and I spent a lot of time.
It's your best book ever, by the way. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Garry. And you know what? I felt that it was an enjoyable read because I enjoyed writing it.
Yep.
And it was an easy book to write. And as you know, I talk a lot about the learnings I took from a lady by the name of May Thiel. And when we talk about different cultures and values and beliefs, and who is now a Buddhist monk who looks after kids in a HIV home, and I think she's one of the most influential people in shaping how I view challenge, how I view resilience, and how I view commitment. And I'm incredibly fortunate that I spend time with her each year. I'll be spending time with her on the back of a bike in a few weeks' time, and being in her presence again is something that has and will continue to shape me as a person.
We can all, some of us, be thankful that we have had good mentors. I think one of the challenges today is people don't reach out to look for a mentor because it can do wonders in terms of our own personal development. But also the reciprocity is that as a mentor, you can get a hell of a lot of satisfaction from helping mentees.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Is that something you have had the opportunity of doing, of mentoring others?
It's funny, I've had a number of people ask me through, and a lot of it's through the charity sector, can you mentor me? And I say, sure. What does that look like? And it leads to another discussion that you and I are having around if someone's not clear on what you're asking from them, if there's not a framework, if there's not clear deliverables, having a mentor, what does that mean? Is it someone that I look up to, someone I catch up with every now and again, someone who I sit by the fire with and we have a brew or whatever we're drinking? Or is it someone that I meet on a 2-monthly basis for 2 hours that's locked in the diary and we talk about life? And I think and it's probably something that I got a text message yesterday from someone who started our first corporate ride with us back in probably 2015, and he struggled and struggled and struggled to get the riders, but truly believed in the concept. And we've now wrapped a committee around that ride, and it's sold out. And in July of next year, and he wrote to me expressing gratitude and appreciation for those who come on the journey, and the learning that comes. And I think that having seen people on that ride, and the value of that experience, and if being present on that ride and my presence brings positive growth for someone, well, that's a wonderful thing.
Very much so. Totally agree. I actually think that you probably mentor more people than you realise.
Potentially.
Those who continually come back for the rides are being nourished by your advice, guidance and wisdom.
I think that, thank you for that, but I think a big part of it is the tribe that they come into. And it's a story I tell about you that when you rode the first time, within the first couple of legs or day or so forth, you said to me, it's a very cliquey group. And I said, Garry, I don't think it's a cliquey group. I think it's that you've got these people who haven't seen each other, and but they form such strong bonds and connections. And they come back 12 months later, and I remember when you came back on your second ride, and you were part of that cliquey group.
Exactly.
And it's, we've got people who ride with us, and it's like there's a guy, Dave Anderson in Melbourne, who he's a nurse, and he sells and services don't try to form the connection, but sells and services sewing machines as part of his her side hustle, and it's a commercial sewing machine. But the profit he makes from that is the fundraising that he uses so he can come and ride every year with us.
Fantastic.
And he talks about the ride and the task force and the experiences as a highlight of his year. And I think it's the power of those rides and the people that are there and that create, that reason to come back.
Very much so. Peter, we've had a fabulous session here today, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time. You give great insight to not only how to build communities and how really to bring people along for the ride, pardon the pun, but you're a fabulous Australian, and we're very grateful that you've taken the time to chat with us today. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure, Garry. It's been great to catch up, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your personal brand, please visit garrybrowne.com.au to get in touch or grab a copy of Brand New, Brand You.